Alright, going right off the cuff. Not even gonna sugarcoat it. Not even gonna do this live. I'm gonna try not to do this live, just because it's something short and sweet and simple. But the build, let's see, the build I've been using predominantly focuses on crits, max damage. Necro has poor survivability, very little reduction, and no mobility. There's hardly any mobility unless you really go gunning blazing for that in gear, but that's not going to get you very far. So primarily, we'll get to that mess later, but you want to start as minimum as possible and pretty much just never upgrade this, because all this is your backup essence, your base essence generation. There's a better, more primary way to run essence generation, but this is your go-to if absolutely everything all fails. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully everything's dead by then. Then you want to start minimum. It depends on how many points you have. It is key if you're going for max damage that this is maxed. That one is optional. If at the very end of every other essential skill you feel like you need more essence, go for that. Because there are some abilities that do play off of essence gain and essence that's left over, but this build will not require that. It's just 1 point to get to the 3. Bone Spear. Bone Spear is your friend. Bone Spear is your holy sacred Bible. It is your key aspect. It is the only thing in this whole build that actually works, matters. It is what's pulling the weight for the entire character. I always say if they nerf this item, if they nerf this ability, Necromancer will be buried with his minions, and there won't be anything left. You want to do, of course, that. Second ability, work your way into the vulnerable. Vulnerable is huge when we get into the aspects. Vulnerable is huge, it's massive. You could, all things dependent, if you wanted to put one of your extra points towards the vulnerable on basic to trigger the vulnerable effect, or if on another ability later you can also do the vulnerable effect, and you can go with just straight crit chance with the extra projectiles. I personally love the consistent vulnerable. The instant guaranteed proc makes the follow-up shot absolutely devastating, and also it makes your backup spears that return to you hit that first initial vulnerable target also, which will also play into another aspect that we have in the build. So you just want to eventually, doesn't matter, you don't have to crank this up right away, but as long as in the end of the build, this is level 5. That's the only one that I'd say, the only core ability I'd say that's absolutely necessary if you wanted max damage. This, I never thought of this in other previous builds, but this is huge. To have that 12% chance to create a corpse absolutely stacks your available damage and potential, especially on bosses, single target damage. What I ran and do a lot of times was, especially with minion builds, blood builds, I needed to proc corpse explosion, or I needed to use it for tendrils, and if the boss doesn't spawn any ads or any enemies, you're kind of dead in the water. Your whole build just stops, and your whole flow is done. Whereas with this, you'd be surprised how many bodies you can stack up on a world boss, an elite boss, dungeon boss, a nightmare boss. You can stack up corpses all over the place. That'll allow you on later skills to increase your essence gain, increase your damage gain. It will just absolutely bolster your single target and your multi-target DPS. You notice it more with a single target, but it will also help in multiple situations because you can also spawn more than one corpse per even a minor enemy potentially, which gives you a lot more damage potential there as well. Next is Blood Mist. Blood Mist is, it's not necessary. It's nice. It gives you that time to react. If you get stunned, you can pull out of it. If you are in a really sticky situation, which does happen, you can pull out and you're just fine. You don't have to worry about any of that. I recommend going up into this section because again, leaving corpses, which are always good. I've used this to open up. I have 2 open up moves. I can use this to open up if I'm not feeling like I can take out a target safely. I'll use this to safely go in, make a corpse, come back, and then start off the combo. Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion is another one of those massively important key core abilities. Personally, I only had 4 for the longest time. I do have a 5 out of 5 on this. I did use my recent point that I got for Rage in Progress and Renown Progress into Corpse Explosion because it is one of these skills I proc the most. It is absolutely insane. And I used to use this, where it does more damage to vulnerable. You can do that. You can absolutely do that. But I found that doing the Darkness Ring is very nice because you get overall more damage. Yeah, the longer the target obviously sits there, you get more than the initial blast. You get the initial blast plus a few more bursts of 6 to 7 to 8 to 9. It just goes up the more you have. It lingers, it stays. And there's plenty of darkness skill and ramp damage. There's plenty of darkness skill damage reduction. There's plenty of damage skill, extra damage you deal within that ring. There's a lot of bonuses that play into that exact element of skill when it comes to darkness and the ring. I just find that it's very useful. And a lot of gear that I have just happens to have darkness and darkness reduction and darkness damage increase skills. It just so happen to naturally flow into that category. People can use Bone Spear. You know, if you're not going to use Blood Mist, Blood Spear. I recommend Blood Spear. Blood Spear's up there. I recommend Bone Prison. Bone Prison is nice. I used this prior in other videos. I've used this well. The only negative I'd say to Bone Prison is it has the ability to trap you with your enemy, and if you do not have a dodge, your squishy little bean butt will be squished. So it requires some timing and distance and precision, but it is also a very powerful ability. It'll even stop a boss. It won't hold the boss technically, but the boss doesn't know any better, and the boss will auto-target the ring, because the ring is technically an enemy of the boss, and it will aggro and not even move from the center ring. So it does distract and cause vulnerable once you hit this ability here. And so if you're not going to run the life-saving Blood Mist, then you can run the distracting Bone Prison. Next is consuming a corpse generates 6 essence. Grim Harvest. As I was saying up top, with the other ability, this one here, this does generate essence. Doesn't cost anything to cast, but it does take a moment to go out there and hit. Whereas this ability with Corpse Explosion, whenever you consume a corpse, you gain essence. You can pop 8 to 9 corpses in 10 seconds, probably even faster. And that's a lot of essence, especially when you have other skills that may actually give you extra essence percentage per ability cast. You'd be surprised how fast on the essence gain you can actually achieve with this. And then this is also an optional skill. I'd say it's partially optional. I recommend it because you're going to be consuming corpses as your primary essence source, primary area damage control, and your ability debuff. Why not get the extra damage? That's a passive free gain of damage. There's no reason to not have that. Next, we go down to here. We just skip all the curse skills. You can do curse. I recommend Decrepify if you're going to run any curse. But you're going to be sacrificing some key stuff later. It's an optional bit if you wanted to run Decrepify. But you will be sacrificing something. And I think everything in here, ability-wise, is necessary. Everything has a flow. The only things in here I immediately would recommend were distant damage, for when you're distant, and when enemies close gaps, you can also still get a bonus, but you're also not dying as quickly. It's the best, one of the better abilities for close range combat. The next one's weird, because as much as I was saying how Corpse Tendrils is absolutely key, it is absolutely amazing. You don't need to level it up. We're not doing this for damage. We're not doing this for anything major. The minimum cooldown there is well fast enough because you'll be getting essence by the time that comes back. We obviously want the slow. The slow isn't as big as the vulnerable. The vulnerable's huge because with vulnerable, we can group a bunch of enemies in a tight little corner, and the bone spear will hit every single one of them for as max of damage that it can possibly deliver, and continue to spread that vulnerable further. Next, you can tier into these however you want, but the recommend that I have is one into here for critical strike chance bonus because we get to the Book of the Dead skills. This isn't going to be as big of an issue as maybe some other classes may have. Compound Fracture, some gear will give you some of these points. After critical striking 10 times a bone skills, your bone skills deal 5% increased damage for 5 seconds. This is nice, but I found it niche because Bone Spear, if you're running a decent level of essence, casting Bone Spear, say you're casting only Bone Spear as your primary bone skill that you're critting with, to get 10 crits with Bone Spear takes a while. It is not something you can proc in a few seconds. It's something that does take some time. I wouldn't invest too much on that big 10th crit hit because not only you're probably not going to be paying attention to that hit, but you also got to build up to that. It's not quite as good as this because Evulsion is your bone skills deal 18% increased damage, crit damage to vulnerable enemies, which you're going to be proccing every single time you Corpse Tendril, every single time you Bone Spear, every time when we get to the aspects, every time an aspect ability procs with vulnerable abilities, we are going to be doing that amount of damage, guaranteed static all the time. And as for this one, if you were to forego another ability, again, I recommend all of what I got here, but you could put in Bone Spirit as that takes all your essence, throws it out the window, and says, haha, I got you. But I don't know if it is worth that cooldown reduction for a meh ability, because I think Bone Spirit can put out a lot more damage than this. As for Darkness, I do tier into Darkness a little bit. I tip my hat into Darkness because, like I was saying, mobility is bad. Reaper's Pursuit, damaging enemies with Darkness skills grants your movement speed by 5% for 3 seconds. That's something better than nothing. But it also gets us a gateway into this skill. Darkness skills have up to 15% chance to stun. When you are slow and you don't have the mobility to move out of the way of a charging enemy, having any amount of time to slow them down with how much cloud darkness skill you're putting out there, having a chance to stun is very useful. And I find it very common that I can stun a lot of enemies before they trample me over and make me a little ball of mud on the ground. Next, we're obviously going to go with Bone Storm, because it'll play into an aspect I will mention. And you want to level it up all the way, because at the very end, you get heavy critical strike chance, 20% while it's active. And we also get damage reduction, which is key. Then we go here. You can max this out too. This is also an optional one, because you can get up to, I believe it's 18% damage reduction with this, which is always good. But this was the most important. Prioritize this as one of your abilities because 60% sacrifice bonus is huge. It's kind of what you weigh out when you're doing a minion build. Do you want 60% extra bonus? I say yes. Minions are very hard to make work. They're very hard to maintain and keep track with. This is simple. 60% to the Book of the Dead skills that I will demonstrate are very key to this whole thing. And then, of course, Ossified Essence, which is like the Edge Master's aspect in many ways, but for the Necromancer built in for your bone skills. Paragon's a mess. You can do whatever you want to a degree. I recommend going damage. If you're going to go damage, if you're going to do a crit damage build, it's wise to go damage, right? That just screams volumes. You want to go up. Your glyphs, this could depend on what you have, but I would stick with damage. Whatever damage you can pump out, whatever enhances the damage further, I would stick with that. As you can see, I went all damage. I could once I get my levels and I feel like I've done enough boards, I'll go back and fill in some of these slots and get the armor and resistances. But as far as my thoughts right now, if I can kill it really, really fast, I don't have to outlast it because I know I'm not going to outlast those later tier nightmare dungeons. So I went in and did all of the attacks. Went for the attacks. The boards I chose, obviously, we're starting off with bone. Doing another kind of Edge Masters aspect, but with my bone skills here. It's key, it's big, it's a very nice passive to have, and then you go up through your critical skills with bone skills. These are big bonuses that you forget are even there half the time, but they do matter. Then we go up to the next one, and you can turn these boards. If you did not know, you can turn these square boards. That's how you can get them to the legendary aspect sooner, if that's what you want. And we work into here. I like to get the glyphs because the glyph, if you can get it to proc, is a very good damage or damage negation buff, which, like this one, helps me stay alive better. And that's nice because I'm a weak skelly man, and Bone Daddy doesn't like to be boned by other boned individuals. So that's why I like to keep myself nice and strong, lots of damage. And we worked into third board. It doesn't matter what you pick along the way. Just try and suffice your requirements on these abilities, such as this. When you hit the dexterity or the willpower buffs, all that matters is that you hit those marks, because those marks will double the primary attribute skill, which is very big. That's a huge bonus to your build. Going forward, we're going to hit, more damage. Hit all the max damage, all the damage. I haven't hit that one yet. Still working on that. But as you can see, once I do, it's another 25% to injured enemies. Yes, that it does include bosses if they hit that injured state. And when I do a dungeon here, you'll see that even with the injured status, I don't get that to that point. They're usually dead instantly. And if the boss is tough enough to where I need that injured damage, I probably didn't succeed, because this is kind of an all or nothing, and I'll go over that meaning later and what I'm really meaning by that. You go up to here, the legendary node. Consuming 5 corpses grant 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. That's a massive buff because consuming corpses is the whole point of the build. That is a huge rotator for our essence. That pretty much just jump starts the whole build. Once you consume those 5 corpses, that's a 40% increase just flat for 6 seconds. It's a very nice bonus. On the last bit, still kind of working on that. I mean, it's whatever you can make work on however you make work. And this is specific to Necromancer. You will not find these on any other class, of course. But this is what I was going for, just damage. Hitting as hard as I could. Again, because I don't have the time or luxury as a slow, weak Mancer to wait for my enemies or allow them to get close enough. I have to take them out ASAP. Don't want to give them that time of day. As for Book of the Dead, of course, we're sacrificing everything that we can. So I recommend Skirmishers, because Skirmishers are your critical strike chance is increased by 7%. You can no longer raise Skeleton Warriors. Well, we are increasing that from our abilities down here by a whopping 60%. That's a 67% chance overall that we are getting an increase. That is, I shouldn't have to explain how massive a 67% increase is to critically striking, when critical hits are the bread and butter, the creme de la creme, the creme brulee next to your garlic bread. I don't know if that's a thing. Damage. That's huge. That's big. If you want to run darkness, obviously run darkness. But this is huge. It's necessary. Skeletal mages. We run skeletal mages with increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Again, that's a very clear winner. Vulnerables are one of our key debuffs. It's going to be happening all the time, every time. Every time we shoot off our main priority weapon, the Bone Spear, that's going to be hitting for 81%. That's huge. I wouldn't mess with much of these other ones. Essence, again, if you wanted to swap out, say, one of the other abilities for the Bone Spirit, this would definitely benefit your Bone Spirit. But like I said, this is a more consistent, speedy, fast, consistent way to get damage and have something ready at all times. And this is more for blood. I want to do a blood build eventually and redo it properly because I feel this is a really, really good ability. And golems. So golems are not affected by that ability that I had previously stated. It only works with skeletal mages and the infantry. However, we'll go over a skill that benefits this as well, where you deal 41% increased critical strike damage. Like we lose the ability to summon a golem. I'm not really a fan of Greg the Golem. Greg the Golem doesn't do it for me, personally, but that's that. Book of the Dead, pretty simple stuff. You're just going for whatever can hit the hardest. As for character, it's really only, I believe, 2 or 3 aspects here. So this one, that one, and that one. Okay, so 3 aspects I highly recommend. I have a lot of unique gear on. This is nice as a passive, but not necessary. Bone Spear leaves behind echoes as it travels that explode, dealing 1,115 damage for every blast. That's nice to have. It is not necessary. But the things you're looking for on your armor are things such as that 30% critical strike damage of bone skills, the third minor skill on my armor there, or physical damage, anything that increases our damage. Damage, crit chance, anything that makes us able to hit things harder. We want to bone things as hard as humanly possible because we don't want them to bone us. That is the whole idea. I'm playing around with chess pieces. This is something I've recently imprinted, where I've run into a lot of crowd control effects, where the enemies are putting Nightmare, Frost, Stuns, they're hitting you with all these things. Much like the Rogue I've discovered, if you get stunned with this, you're dead. You're not recovering from anything. Or say you run into an enemy with ice bites or ice hammers or ice blades, and they just keep perpetually stunning you over and over and over. You get hit with one of those, this will save you. This will bail you out for a whole 4 seconds. If you become injured while you're stunned or nightmared or not able to play your character, pretty much, it will make you unstoppable, which breaks you out of those crowd control effects for 4 seconds. That's a lifesaver. Once you're stunned, you can't heal, can't use abilities, can't do anything to save yourself. This will allow you to break free of that effect and heal. That is very useful. I don't notice it ever working half the time, but I do know it's working because I'm dying a lot less. But it's still something that I'm playing with. It's not mandatory, but it does help. In tight jams, tight hallways, tight pickles, and a lot of the dungeons are very tight hallways and corridors. The gloves, I have about 5 of these laying around. This is nice. You know, the ability to freeze, crit strike chance, the ability to freeze and have a freezing effect. Although not necessary, although it's not huge, I like it. It's a nice passive. It's convenient that it can just stun an enemy also on top of my darkness abilities. But it also has a lucky hit up to 5% chance to restore 21% of my primary resource. There's a chance that my darkness ticks can cause that ignition. Or, my Bone Spirit can, anything I do can cause that uptick in resource production. So it's just a fun thing to have. It's not necessary. As with pants, this is one of the absolute mandatories. This absolutely has to be in the build. This makes Bone Storm 10 times better, and anything that increases our abilities that we're using are amazing. Like 3 ranks and Corpse Explosion, I'll take that all day, every day. But the skill that is oh so important is each time that a bone storm damages an enemy, gain a barrier equal to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds. I have the highest roll of that currently, but even at 2%, this is huge. I will show a dungeon after this where I go in and I proc this. This allows me to go in like a maniac, like a reckless fool, and take out the enemies before this expires. This will tank a ton of damage, and it's a really good panic ability that'll even persist if you're stunned. So that way you do have a little bit of leniency, so you're not always proccing and relying on the prior chest plate that I don't necessarily recommend all that well. Boots, I want new boots. I want the Frostwalker boots or some other form of unique boot. These are good primarily because of the 3 max evade charges. My intellect goes up with this. Essence cost reduction. It does have good abilities. It has lucky hit chance with shadow damage and damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage. Those are both big. But the unique skill is kind of useless. We're not using Sever. I tried incorporating Sever in an alternate version of this build. Does not work. It just falls so short that I kind of just took the hit on that skill, and I just accepted that the miners are good enough. The weapon. I have a unique weapon. It's optional, but when I equipped it, I was dealing a significant less amount of damage because this weapon is a sword. It is an ancestral two-handed sword, and it deals a ton of extra crit damage, 52.5% on the weapon itself. And then if you go down 118 on basic, 55 on ultimate, 64.5 on vulnerable, 39 on affected by damage shadow over time enemies. I said that in all the wrong ways. But yeah, damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies, 39%, which is again where the pools of blight are going to guide us. This is another mandatory skill. I imprinted the lower quality one on here, but this is mandatory at any level. Absolutely mandatory. And these are all available if you look through your aspect guide. You can find them in there. Under the Necromancer tree, I've already done them. I don't remember exactly where these are. I didn't think I would be doing a guide build for this, but for the 17 Necromancers out there in the world, this is necessary. Because this gives me extra critical strike chance whenever I cast Corpse Tendrils, which then makes things vulnerable and pulls them together. You deal 60% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils. That is a massive amount of damage, and of course I have 2 Royal Gems there to make that even more. But that is huge. I took that off to try and attempt to run something without it, and it does not work. It is bad, and that's why the unique is not in here. Is because I went from dealing 800 to 1,000,000 on my maximum combo to 200 to 300,000. It was a huge decrease in my power. And then we come to these. The good old, my underpowered amulets and rings. But Bone Spear on this one is huge. Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for 2.1 seconds. Bone shards from Bone Spear deal 80% bonus damage to vulnerable enemies and pierce them. So if you're not quite sure how Bone Spear works, you fire off a giant spear that initially hits. Our first spear will hit vulnerable. Then the spears come back in a triple pattern and they return back towards you and they hit again. This is big because this makes those secondary spears very, very big, and it allows us to vulnerable past the first target, which is also big. So we're constantly hitting vulnerable, and our backup spears are not just backup spears anymore. They are also now a primary source of DPS, which is nice. We like more options. We like more DPS. Solid. Amazing. Absolute must on this if you want to be killing things. On the second ring, this one you can mess around with. I found a ton of success with consuming a corpse grants the damage of your next core skill by 6% up to 30%. And that is almost the highest roll on both stats. This is big. I dare say this is mandatory, but not really. you can make things work with the other two skills, but this is huge. This is a big increase to the Bone Spear ability passively. If you can just suck up a bunch of corpses before going into battle, and then your next engagement, you just whack whatever it is you're up against. That's amazing. You know, these servers aren't the greatest things in the world. Don't mind the Barbarian. I'm working on Necro. Well, like I said, off the cuff. Completely at random. Emma. Yeah, having played Destiny for so long, you know, I've gotten more patient with servers. Alright. Alright. So as I was saying, big damage, amazing, but not absolutely necessary. If you can find something that you feel works, put it in there. Now we have another one. I mentioned this earlier in the skills guide. Your sacrifice bonuses are increased by 38%. That's the higher end. Normally I see them drop at around 25, but this is a 38%. That's going to make that 60% a 98% increase, which makes all of our skills, including, this includes the Golem, to go up in percentage value, which is huge. Makes this go up more. It makes all of these base values skyrocket. And we're hitting almost 100% on every single one of those categories, except for the Golem. It's in the 70s. Those are huge stat boosts that I feel... I feel naked without them, but I don't think you need them. But who wants to argue 38% extra stats across your board on your primary juicing ability? Gems, I recommend max health. Survivability is key, as survivability will help your Bone Storm ability generate more fortification on you, because it works off of your base life, which these will enhance the base life. I would go on weapon vulnerable damage crits, because those are huge. And then on jewelry, you can kind of flex whatever you want in here. I did armor, because I'm squishy as it is. I need more armor. Armor's good. This actually is a good honorable mention. I forgot that I had those on me, because I do have the Ancestral Unique ability here. If you wanted to go ice with Frostborn, you can do that. You're just losing a ton of damage on that. Even though it is a plus 283, I do lose a ton of damage on that ability, but that's a preference that you can decide when you get there. These are amazing. I love these gauntlets. If they worked a little better than Frost gauntlets, then I would. The Frost gauntlets just barely edge ahead for me on this, but these are good. I would argue these are both equal. But having the extra freeze, a little bit of that freeze extra damage, and then the crit chance increase is just really nice, because your corpse explosions will just naturally be good. They don't need an extra 40% increase to be absolutely destructive. They are just good already. And like I said, anything else you can work with. You can work around barriers if you want, but I don't recommend going that hard into barriers, as those are temporary increases that aren't guaranteed to work. Everything here is guaranteed to work just by using the class as it is. Now we're going to go into a dungeon, and we're going to do the basic rotation of abilities once the server catches in. I am going to decline that for a moment while I go down here. This is the dungeon everyone's farming. It is the big bad dungeon everyone can't get enough of. So the primary rotation we're running with, again, you can start with this basic ability, but I don't advise that. You're going to want to open up with something like Bone Spear, kill a few enemies, and if say you don't kill a few enemies, you can start with your Blood Mist. Blood Mist will spawn a corpse, you lower your enemies, Corpse Tendril, Shadow Blast, hit him with the spear. Might need one or two, but everything dies. That's the key. Not getting hit is the key, because Blood Mist comes back pretty generously. So it's not a huge cost to lose. I do not use Bone Storm unless I know I'm up against a horde of enemies or a boss. And in some cases, you may be able to get away with just hitting them with Bone Spear. You may not need the extra additive bonus. Bone Spear may be good enough on its own. But the Corpse Tendrils is amazing for crowd control. It really lowers your enemy's movement very nicely. And as for Corpse Explosion, it's good for this. Controlling, and again, we have skills that lessen our damage taken while being in those. Our enemies are slower, they take more damage. We get more damage for consuming several of them. Always be spamming the corpse explosions. And you'll be hitting consistent 4 to 500s. I have hit 1,000,000. I hit 1,000,000 damage at 79, level 79. Although, at this current point, I haven't seen 1,000,000s consistently enough to say that this is guaranteed to be 1,000,000 damage hit. But you still want to play smart. You still want to play wise, jump around. Don't sit there and get hit. Like this, for example, I'll use Bone Storm. The armor will come to me, and I will be a tank while I use my tendrils and hit him with the spear. Pretty simple demerit. And then we're going to hit this. Hit all of these for our essence to come back. Heal while we have it. And then you just progress like normal with that standard rotation in play. Like those guys didn't die. Look at Ancestral. We're hitting this, we're hitting this. We hit Bone Spear, we heal, we back off. When we hit, then we hit them with more power. Like I said, low mobility. But when you're dealing this much damage, makes things a little easier. Watch out for those, because those will hurt you. Those will devastate you. This is a very simple dungeon. I'll do it all the way through so you can see the boss. These are amazing with my unique because it slows the projectile down quite a bit. But seeing that we got frozen, we hit Blood Mist to get out of that nastiness. Because again, not good stuff. We don't want that. Dodge, dodge, dodge. Hit him with this. Back off. Corpse Tendrils will do the work for us. That is a great scenario. That's the benefit to this specific unique helmet I have, is it slows down my projectiles enough for it to do the trailing explosions 1,000 times, which is nice. There's a 570. But you don't really even need a 570,000 crit. Seems a little overkill right now. Not many enemies I can take that kind of heat. But we want to be prepared for that eventual tier 5 in the world tiers. And this is tier 4. This is not a weak little tier 3 build. This works in tier 4. I've done solo nightmares up to rank 37. Certain affixes can hurt you. We are still a necromancer. We are still not great of a class. But we make it work the best we can. But with the damage we're dealing, we can ring around the rosy, we can bait, we can trap, we can set things up, and then that's what it ends up looking like. Occasionally your character will need more time for things. We're going to again use this. We're going to pull in everybody in, and then just wipe them out. Nothing left. Another Ancestral. Look at that. How fancy. We're going to hit that because, a waste of abilities, not to use it, Is it cheating? Yeah, maybe. Becoming the aspect of lightning may be a cheat. But as a necromancer, we'll take cheats wherever we can get them. Because we're necromancers, and that's kind of what we need and what we do. Alright, aside from that, I'm going to hit this. Boom. Must have been a goblin here. Totally missed my goblino. Down. And the the aesthetic I have is actually all unique armor. This is the entire unique armor set from, I believe, this chest piece. Nope, not Archon. Not wearing any pieces currently from it, but this is all a unique set. Alright, we're going to jump in and see on this, I would pop Bone Storm. Because we have to be next to our enemy, we have to close a very close gap. I hate shield ability. I've stated that many, many times. The Bone Storm helps us. It saves us. It prevents us from getting wiped in that scenario. These minor enemies don't concern me very much. Whatever. Light work for a Mancer of the Necro. Look at this damage. Future domains die coming to you. Passively on bosses? What's wrong with a little extra damage? Hit him with this. Fall him in. Dead. Gone. We're going to go through. We're going to go through. Boom. Well, see, there's the Frost Gauntlet. Stunning. Freezing. And those guys are gone. We're going to use this to get some essence. And the rotation is simple. Spear, spear, spear. Bone Storm or Tendrils. Or Mist. If you're stuck. Tendrils really ideally safe for damage. When you know you're going to be hitting really, really hard. Or for groups of enemies that you feel are worth hitting. That was a waste. I shouldn't have done that, but kind of instinctually just get into a rhythm and flow with this. It's not really something that you'll be watching meticulously. There's the ice again. Blood Mist saving us. We heal during Blood Mist. We do Tendrils. Sometimes Tendrils won't cast where you told it to cast, and that's fine. Even just casting the Tendrils, even without hitting anything, casting Tendrils still gives us crit damage and crit chance, but we get a lot more damage when we actually hit our enemies. Having 3 dodge charges. I recommend it on gear. Now we're going to pop this because fire is bad. I've noticed on Necromancers, fire is a horrendous debuff. But Bone Storm kept us at full health that whole time. The only negative to Bone Storm is, yes, you're relying on that immunity phase. Not quite immunity. You get hit with enough, you will die. But it takes a lot. Oh, look at another one. But you are waiting a whole 50 seconds for that ability to come back to you. It's worth it. Because even so, you still have the other reliable source that we have, which is damage. Damage keeps this going. Damage keeps this whole thing afloat. And like this, I'll get crazy. I'll run out there. I'll say, yep, we got this. Just to show it off, pop this, hit a little tendril, group them in, bone spear. This works at any level. Any level that's not completely outrageous, like Nightmare tier 60s and 50s. This works. This has been the best way that I have made this particular class work. I did Blood getting up to this point, and I tried Minion for a little bit. Minions was just so disappointing and very abysmal as far as results. But I'm loving this. This is juiced. You want to know what is the meta? Sorcering Necromancer is meta. Because that's what we are. We're a sorcerer. We're a casting sorcerer. Now this, I recommend trying to proc those, the corpses, with our basic. Then we do, in the order, Tendrils, Darkness, Bone Storm, hit him with all you got. Boss gone. You didn't even see that health bar. He's just gone. And that would conclude, that would conclude the build. and how it works, the rotations you need to do. Again, it's all about damage. Anything that adds damage to anything on your ability that you're currently using is good. You can add another survivable skill if you wish. If you don't have as much unique armor as I do, then you can run with more survivability things. Like, maybe I don't need these. I just like flex, and they work. They work well, and I can flex with them, but they're not needed. Most of the ancestral unique gear is not necessary. If there was any ancestral gear aside from the Grandchild or Harlequin, this would be it right here, because this weapon's massive. Bone Spear is just insane. And say if your Bone Spear doesn't kill on that initial hit, which is about 50-50, or 70, it depends on what you're up against, your explosions might just do it. And they add extra damage DPS, or when they put up those frost walls, you can see that the frost walls actually really screw the enemy. Take a look at these. See a lot of minion summon things. Decompose. I want to do something with Decompose as well. This is a good ability. It's everyone uses this one. It's classic. You can throw it on as in placement for the injured thing, because that'll also save you every so often. There's a few pinnacle skills that I would say you could use, but overall, this has worked. It's done me good, and I recommend this build for anyone trying to run Necro. And you're struggling. You're running Sever, you're running any combo of skills, and you're like, man, I feel pathetic. You're getting slapped around by all the NPCs and everything that's running around. This is what I recommend. Anyway, that'll do it for now. This is just a short, sweet, simple explanation and go over breakdown video with a few disconnects in the middle because we love servers, especially from Blizzard. Peace out.